Well, it is that time of year. An event that these days, sadly, only happens about 3 times a year. That's right, it's time to have a look at some League of Legends lore. Something which these days we only get through new champions or reworked champions. And which we used to get multiple times a month, and now I am really sad. Anyway, from the very beginning, Skarner was in a bit of a dark place. And that's simply because his old story had some really rich lore. And the lore carried Skarner quite far. All while Skarner himself wasn't really that interesting. The Hextech and the Breckern though, that's something else. Well now, all that lore was wiped, because it was kinda brutally taken away by Arcane. So now only one question remains. Can the new lore redeem what was lost? Well, while stories are heavily subjective, and different people might like different things, I believe most people will agree that the potential of the new story is there. And dare I say it, the new Skarner lore feels kinda nostalgic, because it really feels like the good old days of simply getting good stories. Something which we don't get a lot of anymore. So without further ado, let's have a look at Skarner's new official story. Skarner is a name that's been circling around the Ixtali for generations. There are stories of the Breckern who shaped the earth and built the first arcologies, which, according to the internet, means the fusion of architecture and ecology, a comprehensive urban perspective. This still won't tell you much. In other words, it is awesome buildings aligned with nature. Or in other words, for the other words, it is these awesome pyramids we can see in Ixtal. But over time, even though Skarner's image was immortalized, after enough generations, he became a myth. One that was still honored and revered. But deep beneath Ixaocan, which is described here as the Cardinal Arcology, though we simply know it as the capital city, Skarner dwelled. There he listened to the vibrations of Earth around him, as he waited for something to come. But the myths about Skarner started millennia ago, back when the Breckern lived among their clans. Now, first of all, yes, this is a new piece of lore. The Breckern had their own clans, which sounds really cool. But what's scary about it is their names. They are using special characters I have never seen in my life, so excuse my pronunciation. So, born to the Breckern clan Opalhin, Skarner was the spawn of the legendary broodmother Nishale. But while the other Brecklings quickly left the safety of their mother's back, that's right, Brecklings is a new word for young Breckern, Skarner chose to linger, with his unease and curiosity driving him to study his mother's power and wisdom, which soon paid off. Unlike his broodmates, Skarner honed the Breckern's innate control of Earth and perfected the art of reading underground vibrations, allowing him to sense and decipher faraway movement. A bit later, when Skarner was older, these vibrations showed Skarner a drastic change in the continent, marked by the arrival of settlers from the east. And of course, if you have a look at the map, you can see that people traveled here from the deserts. The Breckern clan Opalhin did not trust these newcomers, but Skarner was still curious. He needed to know what these settlers really wanted. So he surveyed these Ixtali people, as they were called. They were born, they toiled, they died. There 1 second, gone the next. However, throughout his observations, Skarner saw that they used whatever limited time they had to build, create, and invent. Their existence fascinated Skarner, until he found out just how fragile they were. There was a rock slide that threatened to destroy an Ixtali settlement, and Skarner intervened so he could protect his subjects of observation. He emerged from the jungle, towering over the people, and he used his physical strength and his command over Earth to crush the rock slide before it could get near the village. As the dust cleared, the people looked up at their savior in awestruck reverence and gratitude. After that, within Skarner, a protectiveness began to stir. These fragile beings would not survive without him. So after this, he no longer just watched. And instead, Skarner spent less and less time with his clan, as the humans became his personal project and his new home. Yes, this is indeed a quote from the story. The relationship he formed with the early Ixtali was one of exchange. The Ixtali shared their culture and history, and Skarner used his Breckern powers to help them build Ixaocan, where the planet's lines of power connected. This is cool, because this is something that was hinted in stories before, and it was actually teased in a tweet years ago. But now it is cool to have a direct confirmation that Runeterra's magic flows around the planet as if it was a bunch of rivers. Anyway, Skarner's greatest contribution was to be a founding member of the Ixtal, combining the Ixtali's scientific mindset with the collectivist culture of the Breckern. The castle of Ixtal was built to lead its people into a bright future. And so it was through Skarner's protection that the people of Ixtal flourished. Now, as all of this was happening, outside of Ixtal, the Shuriman Empire started conquering the lands around, and Skarner watched as the ascended god warriors stormed the continent. This was the first time Skarner got to see the darker side of humanity. It was corruption, driven by lust for power. Now, unfortunately, this is where we can find a little bit of a plot hole, or rather an inconsistency with the lore. You see, on the Universe website, which is basically the one place for all canon lore, if you go to the regions and if you look for the description of Ixtal, it says that Ixtal joined the Shuriman Empire, which we know is gonna happen because of Malphite, but it also says that the Ixtali likely played a big role in the creation of the first Ascended, which, now according to Skarner's lore, is not true. Because he just mentioned that the Ascended marched around before the Ixtali even joined them. I mean, this isn't really that big of a deal, at least not because Skarner is also retconning another really big portion of the lore. And yes, there is a very easy fix for that. Just delete that sentence. Everything else should be totally fine, so it's just really funny to see that this even happened. Anyway, after Skarner saw the dark side of the humanity for the first time, he could sense the tension in Shurima, and he told everyone that Shurimans were not to be trusted. But when the Shuriman Empire invited the Ixtali to become their allies, the Ixtal was eager to accept, probably just ignoring Skarner's vote. And so, as we know, the Shuriman Empire continued their glorious conquest. And that's until the Kingdom of Icathia decided to rebel against their tyranny. And of course, they rebelled by summoning the Void onto Runeterra, thinking it would save them all, but instead it devoured their entire kingdom, which also eventually led to the collapse of the entire Shuriman Empire. Which is how Skarner's choice not to trust Shurimans was vindicated. But more than that, after the Ixtali regained their independence, Skarner had nothing but disgust left for the world outside of their jungles. As the story describes it, in Skarner's head, it was a wasteland of pain and suffering. A wasteland that was made even worse when the Rune Wars eventually followed. Which of course was an event where people found out that the world runes were scattered around the planet, they picked them up and literally used them as magical nukes to destroy entire cities. Now, witnessing such destruction, Skarner finally convinced Ixtal to withdraw from the world, shielding their region with magic and lies to hide themselves away. Specifically, from other stories, we know that they used magic to build giant walls of plants around the entire region, isolating them from anything that would be beyond those walls, and they lied by telling people that the Void destroyed the entire world, and that the Ixtali were the only living people on the entire planet. And according to the Axiomata story, This lie went so far that the people really thought the entire world was annihilated. As in, people thought that if they walked outside the walls, they would suffocate because the void destroyed all reality, including the air. Yeah, they didn't toy around with Ixtal's protection. And after all of this went down, Skarner's faith in the Ixtal was shaken. Where they had failed to keep Ixtal safe, he would not. Now knowing only he could protect Ixtal, Skarner constructed himself an underground chamber below Ixaocan designed to amplify vibrations, so he could feel any and all possible threats to Ixtal's safety. But at the same time, he could also hear the steady noise of Ixtal above him, which proved that because of him, the city continued to survive. There, he listened and he waited. But as he waited, his paranoia festered, until, over time, vigilance gave way to seclusion, and he stopped leaving his chamber altogether. To the Ixtali above ground, Skarner slowly faded into a myth, his presence only now known to the Ixtal, who occasionally traveled underground to get his advice on Ixtal's future. But now, as new generations of elemental masters joined Ixtal, they started talking about the possibility of Ixtal coming out of its isolation. Perhaps, as Kiana spearheaded the idea, Ixtal was ready to rejoin the world. Of course, Skarner could hear these whispers, which would spur his paranoia, as he knows that opening the door will invite pain, suffering, and death, just like it did generations ago. The only one Skarner could trust was himself, and he'll do anything it takes to protect Ixtal and its people, even if it means becoming the root of their destruction himself. Well, that's a scary and kinda out of character line to end all of this, right? Would Skarner rather kill Ixtal because it was his personal project instead of just letting them go? I don't know how to read into this one. But anyway, that was Skarner's new bio. And honestly, I have to admit, it was a really good one. It did have some inconsistencies with the previous lore, but considering we are also retconning Hextech, I don't think it's that big of a deal. What is sad is that no matter how good this story is, it will always have a bit of a sour taste, because it is also getting rid of another really good story. What I liked here is that the story was not afraid to go into details. It went into the history of Runeterra, and it even gave us a lot of information on the Breckern themselves. In contrast, when you look at Smolder's story, that one was quite a bit shorter, and that's despite all the awesome connections to Kamavor. Not to mention, half of Smolder's story was also told in his short cinematic. Skarner didn't even get that, and yet his story seems richer. So this is a big positive for Skarner's new lore. But again, some people will be sad, because his old story was cool too. But regardless, I'm just happy that after reading this story, it really felt like a good old story we got during the times when we kept getting masterpieces. I really almost felt nostalgic about this. I mean, can you believe we used to get multiple massive stories a month? Well, despite that, this story didn't explain one question everyone keeps asking. The Breckern are a race, and we now know they even have multiple clans. And as far as we know, they should be alive? I mean, nothing really happened to them and they live underground. So, is Runeterra hollow? Have you seen how big Skarner is? How big is their broodmother? Where are the other Breckern? Even if they died, their corpses still have to be somewhere. So just how big are they?